Ever feel like you're speaking a different language than someone? Even if you're both like using English, like you just fundamentally get certain people while others just remain a total mystery.
Yeah.
Well, Carl Jung might have an explanation for that. Today, we're taking a deep dive into his theory of psychological types. Our main source, the art of Nafsychology, and trust me, this isn't just about introverts versus extroverts.
Right.
We're going way beyond those basic online quizzes, diving into Jung's own book, Psychological Types, to uncover the surprising depth of his ideas.
What's fascinating about Jung is that he wasn't just like trying to categorize people.
Right.
He wanted to understand the root system of personality, those underlying structures of the mind that shape how we see and interact with the world.
So it's like not just what we do,
Yeah.
but the why behind it all.
Exactly. Take the classic introvert-extrovert example.
Right.
Most people think it's about being shy or outgoing, right?
Yeah.
But Jung saw it as a question of where you get your energy.
Right.
Do you feel energized by being around people, by external stimulation? That's extroversion. Or do you find yourself recharged by solitude, by diving into your inner world?
Right.
That's more introversion.
Okay.
That makes so much sense. Suddenly I'm seeing all my friends and family in a new light.
Yeah.
But this is just the tip of the iceberg, isn't it?
It is.
Jung identified 4 main functions: thinking, feeling, sensation, and intuition. What's the deal with those?
These functions add another layer to understanding personality. And here's the kicker. Jung believed we all have all these functions within us, like a kind of mental toolbox. But we each have 1 or 2 that are more dominant, like our go-to tools.
Right.
So you might lead with thinking, approaching the world through logic and analysis.
Okay.
Or maybe your feeling function is stronger, guiding you with empathy and values.
So I might be an introverted feeler, which explains why I need a whole day to recover after a big party.
Yeah.
But also why I can always tell when my best friend is feeling down, even if she doesn't say anything.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And this is where it starts to get really interesting, because Jung didn't just come up with these ideas out of thin air.
Right.
He saw echoes of them throughout history.
Wait, really? Like where?
You even trace them back to ancient Greek ideas about the 4 humors.
Oh, right.
Sanguine, choleric, melancholic, phlegmatic.
I've heard of those.
Remember those?
Yeah.
That were based on bodily fluids.
Right.
But the core idea was that different personality types were driven by different dominant forces.
So from black bile to modern psychology. But knowing Jung, I bet he was drawing on more than just ancient history.
Oh, absolutely. He was living in a time of massive cultural shifts, the dawn of the 20th century. He saw the friction between tradition and progress,
Right.
logic and emotion, the seen and the unseen.
Yeah.
And he believed these tensions were also reflected in the different psychological types.
So someone who's all about logic and facts might butt heads with someone who's driven by intuition and gut feelings.
Exactly.
Okay.
Jung even observed how these dynamics played out in his own relationships. And he didn't just want to label these differences.
Yeah.
He wanted to find a way to bridge them. That's where the idea of the transcendent function comes in.
Okay, now things are getting really interesting. What is this transcendent function and how does it work?
Think of it as your psyche's way of finding balance. Jung believed that everyone has a shadow side,
Okay.
those lesser developed functions that we tend to ignore or repress.
Right.
And the transcendent function is about acknowledging those hidden parts of ourselves,
Okay.
those less comfortable tools in our toolbox.
So it's not about being stuck in one mode all the time.
Exactly. By tapping into those underdeveloped functions, we can access hidden talents and navigate challenges in a more holistic way.
That's kind of empowering when you think about it. So it's not just about knowing our type, it's about recognizing that we have the potential for all of these functions within us.
Precisely. Jung argued that this was key to personal growth.
Yeah.
And he wasn't just theorizing. He saw these patterns play out in real life, even connecting certain types to historical figures.
Now that's what I call putting a face to a name. Got any examples? Who did he connect with? What type?
Well, he saw Nietzsche, the philosopher who dove deep into the human condition as the epitome of an introverted intuitive.
Right.
Someone drawn to inner visions and big picture ideas.
Yeah.
Not exactly known for small talk at parties.
Definitely tracks with what I know of Nietzsche. But that brings us to the shadow side you mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
That's gotta be a bit unnerving, right? Like finding out your basement is haunted by underdeveloped personality traits.
It's not about being haunted, but rather about recognizing those aspects of ourselves we've neglected.
Okay.
Think of it like this.
Yeah.
If you only ever use your dominant hand, your other hand will be weaker, clumsier.
Right.
But it's still part of you, and with practice, you can strengthen it. The shadow is similar.
Okay, so instead of fearing the shadow, we should be trying to integrate it. What happens if we don't?
Jung believed that an unacknowledged shadow can lead to projections onto others.
No.
We literally start seeing those repressed traits in the people around us,
Right.
which can cause all sorts of problems in relationships.
Oh, so that's what's happening when I get annoyed by someone who's always late. It's my own repressed aversion to tardiness bubbling up.
It could be.
Yeah.
And this is where Jung's work gets particularly relevant to our daily lives, especially in relationships. Imagine trying to navigate a disagreement with someone whose dominant function is your inferior function.
Oh, that sounds like a recipe for disaster. Give me an example of how that might go down.
Let's say you have an extroverted thinker, someone who values logic and direct confrontation,
Okay.
clashing with an introverted feeler, who prioritizes harmony and emotional connection.
Right.
The thinker might try to lay out their argument logically, expecting the feeler to do the same.
Well, the feeler's just trying to make sure everyone still feels loved and heard.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The thinker gets frustrated because they see the feeler as avoiding the issue,
Right.
while the feeler feels bulldozed by the thinker's directness.
It's like they're reading from entirely different scripts, so how can knowing about these types help? It's not like it magically makes conflict disappear, right?
Of course not. But it provides a framework for understanding those differences
Yeah.
and responding with empathy.
Right.
The thinker might realize they need to soften their approach,
Yeah.
while the feeler might need to articulate their feelings more directly.
So it's less about changing who we are and more about learning to speak each other's language.
Exactly. And this applies to all sorts of relationship dynamics,
Right.
not just conflict.
Okay.
Imagine an introverted intuitive, guided by their big picture vision,
Yeah.
making a decision with an extroverted sensor who trusts tangible facts above all else.
Oh, I can see this one going off the rails too. The intuitive is probably off following their gut,
Yeah.
while the sensor is making spreadsheets and weighing every pro and con.
And you can imagine the tension.
Yeah.
The intuitive might see the sensor as a stick in the mud,
Right.
while the sensor sees the intuitive as reckless.
This is making me rethink all my past relationship struggle. But it's also making me appreciate how these differences can actually be complementary, right?
Yeah.
Like, the intuitive can help the sensor see new possibilities, and the sensor can ground the intuitive's ideas in reality.
That's the beauty of it.
Yeah.
Jung believed these seemingly opposite types are often drawn to each other because they provide a kind of unconscious balance.
Right.
The key is learning to appreciate those differences, not let them become points of contention.
It's like that saying, opposites attract, but can they stay together? But let's shift gears for a moment and talk more about the unconscious. That feels like a huge part of Jung's theory.
Absolutely. Jung believed the unconscious isn't just where we repress things.
Right.
It's also a wellspring of creativity and insight.
Okay.
He even went so far as to describe the collective unconscious, a shared reservoir of universal experiences and archetypes.
Okay, now that sounds a little mystical for me. Are we talking about like a universal library of human experience stored in all our brains?
Well,
Yeah.
it's
How literal was Jung being here?
it's a concept that requires some unpacking.
Okay.
Jung believed that beyond our personal unconscious,
Right.
shaped by our individual lives, we also inherit a deeper layer of the unconscious
Okay.
shared by all humanity.
So it's less a physical place and more a way of understanding those universal patterns of human experience.
Yeah.
Like, why are certain myths and symbols present across cultures?
Exactly.
Okay.
Think about recurring archetypes like the hero, the wise old man, or the mother figure.
Right.
These appear in stories and myths across the globe,
Yeah.
regardless of whether cultures had contact with each other.
Wow.
Jung believed this pointed to something deeper,
Yeah.
shared at the level of the psyche.
Okay, I'm starting to wrap my head around it. It's like we all have our own personal stories,
Yeah.
but those stories are playing out on a stage with a shared backdrop of human experience.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And Jung believed that by understanding these archetypes,
Right.
we could gain deeper insights into ourselves and our place in the world.
I'm starting to get chills here. This is going way beyond personality types and into like the nature of consciousness itself. But before we get too lost in the cosmos, let's bring it back down to earth for a moment. How can we practically apply this knowledge of types in our own lives, careers, relationships? It feels like Jung is saying, knowing your type is cool, but like understanding how those deeper forces are at play, that's where things get really interesting.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Jung believed that knowledge of our type, the conscious and the unconscious, can help us make more fulfilling choices.
Okay.
For instance, in careers, an introverted intuitive might thrive in a field that allows them to work independently, exploring ideas and diving deep into their inner world.
Right.
While an extroverted sensor might excel in a fast-paced interactive environment where they can see tangible results.
So it's not about fitting into a box, but rather understanding what kind of environment best suits your natural strengths.
Precisely. And remember, Jung didn't believe we're limited by our type.
Right. He saw individuation, that process of becoming our most complete selves, as a journey of integrating all aspects of ourselves.
Okay.
Those dominant and less developed functions.
So even if I'm a hardcore introvert, there's hope for me to survive a cocktail party without hiding in the bathroom.
Exactly. It's about recognizing those less developed aspects and finding ways to strengthen them. We all have the potential to grow and evolve throughout our lives.
Now that is a truly empowering message.
Yeah.
But I imagine there are pitfalls to all this, right?
Sure.
Can you get too caught up in Jungian types and end up putting yourself or others in a box?
Absolutely. It's essential to approach Jung's work with a critical mind.
Yeah.
It's not about excusing our behavior or labeling someone and assuming that's all there is to them.
Right.
Jung saw individuation as a lifelong process.
Meaning we're constantly growing and integrating new parts of ourselves.
So it's a starting point for self-exploration, not the final destination.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that Jung's theory is just one lens through which to view the complexities of human experience.
Yeah.
There are many other valid perspectives out there. The key is to find what resonates with you.
Right.
And helps you understand yourself and the world around you better.
Well said. It's been quite a journey unpacking all of this, and I'm walking away with so much to think about. What would you say is the most important thing for our listeners to remember about Jung's work?
I think the biggest takeaway is that Jung believed in the inherent creativity of the psyche.
Okay.
He saw our journey toward wholeness as one of self-discovery and transformation,
Right.
with the unconscious serving as a guide.
So, more than just knowing ourselves, it's about actively engaging in that process of becoming.
Precisely. And that's a journey we all have the potential to embark on, regardless of our starting point.
Well, there you have it, folks. It seems Jung's message to the world was to embrace the full complexity of who we are, conscious and unconscious, and see where that journey of self-discovery leads. If this deep dive has sparked your curiosity, I encourage you to explore Jung's work further. You might be surprised by what you uncover. There is so much more to explore within Nafsychology. So as you're learning about all this, here's something to think about. How could understanding your own nafs, your ru, your kalb, those unique parts of yourself, how could that help you become more self-aware, grow as a person, and even have more fulfilling relationships? It's a journey worth taking, I promise.
I love that. And to all our listeners out there, we really encourage you to dive into the world of Nafsychology yourselves. You might be surprised by what you discover about yourself and the people around you. Until next time, keep exploring.